Good afternoon. My name is Alex Burton, and today I'm going to be talking about probabilities in card and dice games. Probability is a way to measure how likely an event is to happen in random games such as rolling dice or drawing cards. Understanding probability can explain strategy, expected outcomes, and why some games favor certain players. Probability measures the likelihood of a specific event. It's calculated as the number of favorable outcomes divided by the total number of outcomes. For example, rolling a 1 on a fair six-sided die has a probability of 1 out of 6. Another example would be in a standard deck of 52 cards, the probability of drawing an ace is 4 out of 52, or 1 out of 13. This is the same probability for every other card in the deck. Of course, odds change, however, as more and more cards get pulled from the deck. Probability also helps us understand the math behind what we often call luck. This luck can also be seen in places like casinos or even just simple card games. Let's start with dice. Rolling a single die is pretty straightforward. Each number from 1 to 6, of course, has a 1 in 6 chance. When rolling two dice, some sums are obviously more likely. For example, rolling a sum of 7 has 6 combinations. On the other hand, 2 or 12 has only one each. Rolling doubles where both dice show the same number has a probability of only 1 in 6. These probabilities help players make decisions in games of chance. They help the players make decisions by knowing which sums are more likely in board games or betting on certain rolls and craps. Understanding these patterns can also help predict outcomes over many rolls. In more complex dice games like Yahtzee, rolling 5 of a kind in one turn is extremely rare. The chances of this roll turn out to be 1 in 1,296. If dice are loaded or biased, probabilities change, which affects strategy and what players may do. Players can use these probabilities to decide whether to take risk or play conservatively. Blackjack could be another instance of this, as people decide to put more money in or take some money out. Over many turns, understanding the odds can significantly improve a player's chances of winning. Once the player starts winning, that's when they gain some edge. Card games involve slightly more complex probabilities than dice because each draw affects the remaining cards. In a standard 52 card deck, each card has an equal chance of being drawn. These chances are obviously 1 in 52. The probability of drawing a specific suit, like hearts, is 13 out of 52, or 1 out of 4. However, unlike dice rolls, card draws are dependent events. That means once a card is removed, the probabilities for the remaining cards change. For example, if you draw an ace, there are now only 51 cards left, and that means there are only 3 remaining aces. This changes the odds of course, drawing another ace. Understanding these changes helps players make better decisions in games like poker, blackjack, or even bridge. Knowing which cards have already been played can influence strategy and improve the chance of winning. Here is a classic example of combinatorics in card games. Different hands have different probabilities. For example, a pair is fairly common, while a flush or a straight is rarer, and a four of a kind is extremely rare. Calculating these probabilities helps players understand how likely their hand is to win. Professional players use these odds to decide when to bet, fold, or call. The probability of getting a full house is much lower than getting a pair, which is why it's considered a stronger hand. By understanding these probabilities, players can make more strategic choices rather than relying purely on luck. Blackjack, probability plays a key role in decision making. The chance of busting depends on your current hand value, so knowing these odds can guide whether you to hit, stand, or double down. Probabilities also change as cards are revealed because each card drawn affects the remaining deck. This is called conditional probability. For example, if many low cards have already been played, the probability of drawing a high card increases, which could affect your decision to take another card. Skilled players track the cards and use probability to minimize risk and maximize expected gain. Even though luck is involved, understanding probabilities gives players a strategic edge and helps explain why the house still has an advantage over time. There are several key probability concepts that apply to both card and dice games. Expected value is the average outcome you can anticipate over many trials, and it helps players understand whether a bet or move is advantage in the long run. The law of large numbers tells us that as the number of trials increases, the actual outcomes will get closer to the theoretical probabilities, which is why short-term results can be misleading. Gambler's fallacy is a common misconception where players believe past events affect independent events. For example, thinking a die is due to roll a 6 after not rolling one for a while. These concepts are essential for understanding strategy and making smarter decisions in games of chance. By calculating expected values, players can weigh the risk and reward of different moves, such as deciding whether to double down in blackjack or to bet on a specific hand in poker. Recognizing that events are independent prevents mistakes based on false assumptions and helps players avoid chasing losses. Understanding these principles can help minimize losses, improve long-term outcomes, and even give casual players a better appreciation for how probability works in everyday games. Additionally, probability can guide decisions in more complex games, such as estimating the likelihood of drawing a certain card combination in bridge, or calculating the best moves in strategy board games that involve dice. So basically, to summarize, dice games are generally simpler, with independent probabilities for each roll. Each die roll does not affect the next, which makes calculating odds pretty straightforward. Card games, on the other hand, have dependent probabilities because each card drawn changes the composition of the remaining deck. This adds complexity and requires players to think strategically about what cards have already been played. Probability explains the strategy, expected outcomes, and the underlying math behind these games. By understanding probabilities, players can make informed decisions rather than relying solely on luck. This knowledge can be applied across different games, from dice-based board games to card games like poker and blackjack. Thank you for letting me present.